Hi, my name is Ryan Gifford, and this is Gifford Fabrication. This is a short shop tour of my two-car garage shop. My shop is set up basically 2/3 wood shop, 1/3 metal shop, and whatever's left is still used for laundry and normal other garage stuff. Haven't parked a car in here for several years. It's been one of those projects that I've been building this shop over probably the last 8 to 10 years, and pretty happy with how it's come out for being such a small space. I'm still very new at this and figuring out things as I go, but I've transitioned from being kind of a 100% power tool worker to being a half and half, maybe a hybrid woodworker. I enjoy using hand tools a lot, and still use my power tools quite a bit as well. So let me walk you around the shop and show you what's here. So this is the hand tool portion of the shop. I built a French cleat wall and have stashed several tools up there over time. Like a lot of, I think, beginning woodworkers, I've gathered tools from different places. Some of these planes were my grandfather's. They weren't anything really special, but I've sharpened them up and made use of them, as well as buying some other Veritas and Stanley planes. There's a handful of file gouges that I really like. Selection of a couple of chisels, both Nerix and Lee Nielsen. Small saw till that I built that covers a couple of tenon saws and some other larger saws as well. This is some small clamp storage and generally junk storage for the most part, honestly. Some clamps, glues, epoxies, all the other stuff that you need kind of on a workbench to a degree, as well as the rest of the tools for workbench stuff. This is my Rikon 12-inch drill press and 10-inch bandsaw. I have a small saw underneath it that I use just for detail work. This is a Craig pocket hole machine that I use quite a bit in carcass work. Obviously there's a lot of small parts and pieces up on that pegboard wall behind it. It's a small workspace, and one of the things that I did with this 10-inch bandsaw to make it more usable is I built a sliding tray underneath it that allows the saw to come all the way out with a light. So it's not terribly unstable, it's not awesome, but it gets the job done, and it lets me feed work the long distance or the long axis in the garage, which I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Also have a DeWalt miter saw on a collapsible rigid trolley that I leave stored here, and then I'll pull it right out into the front yard if I need to make miter cuts, which I do fairly often. So it goes right there. All these pieces are connected with kind of an ad hoc dust system that I built. It all uses 2.5-inch pipe and blast gates. Everything runs back to a small Oneida dust deputy and to a rigid vacuum that sits under there. It works pretty well, quite honestly. It's not perfect, but it does get stuff done, and I'll definitely be upgrading at some point to a larger dust collection system that's more appropriate. So, line of 20-volt DeWalt hand tools under there. That's a Festool Domino. I did kind of spring for that. That's one of my splurge tools, I guess. It certainly does what it's supposed to do. This little drawer is all sharpening supplies, some stones, miscellaneous sharpening stuff. Really, for most of my sharpening, I use the WorkSharp station that I built. Slides out. This thing's phenomenal. It's just absolutely awesome. I'm a very lazy person, so having it right next to where I do my hand tool work is great because I can just flick it on and polish up tools real quick, and then push it out of the way. And it's no longer in my way. This is a Cricut Maker. I use it a lot actually for stencils, for finish work. It's a great tool to have. This is my Prusa Mark III 3D printer. It sits right here for right now. It's eventually going to get moved, but it's not a bad spot for it. It's a great toy to have. This is the spools underneath it, as well as some more storage. This is kind of set up as an assembly table slash pneumatics table. I piped air to it. There's air piped to the whole shop. You'll see that in a minute. But this table, I left the T-tracks in. I used to be really big with T-tracks. I thought they were awesome. And honestly, I found that for hand tool work, not so great. It scars up the wood. But for assembly, it's kind of nice to be able to lock stuff in place a little bit. So some pneumatics here, a couple of miscellaneous tool drawers down there. This also serves as a sanding station. I have overhead some vacuum hose that I attach to the vacuum system from over there, and can do hand sanding over here. This is the main tool chest with all the stuff that you'd expect to find in a tool chest. Nothing real special there. This is my sanding station, I guess you'd call it. That's a V flat table from up in Canada. It's phenomenal. It's 24 inches wide. I just absolutely love it. It's partnered with this oscillating spindle sander, if you will. It's a Grizzly. And I piped the whole thing together with a simple vacuum system down here underneath it. And it uses a tool connected power system. So when the tools turn on, so does the vacuum. This is the rest of my major sanding storage, sanders, and more sanding supplies under here. This is my router table and table saw, and this is really just an old Craftsman contractor saw that my father-in-law gave to me. You can see in the back. And then I put a router table with an Incra lift on it, which I absolutely love. I'm a big fan of Incra. They do some great stuff. I'll talk about this LS positioner here in a minute. But the table saw, and then the built-in tables, the wings to either side, they're just melamine. That's crosscut sled, and then behind that is how you get into the dust collection, the vacuum. So I built this cabinet when I was teaching myself cabinetry to surround the table saw and the router. And there's router storage in here for bits and whatnot. There's some more storage on the bottom for some of the Incra pieces. This is access to the rest of the router. A couple other routers in there, but that's the Incra clean sweep downdraft cabinet for the router. And then on this end is dado stacks and some other saw blades and whatnot. But really the heart of this table saw is this Incra LS positioner. If you've never used one of these, they're just amazing. Basically, it's a Acme screw driven positioning sled. So when it's unlocked and in the open position, you can slide the fence back and forth very easily, and then you can pull it to this half lock position, and with this dial right here you can drive in and out the fence in thousandths of an inch, and then obviously you lock it all the way up and it engages that Acme screw, and then nothing moves. But kind of the heart of this is this track system right here, and there's a steel rule that's zeroed out for the saw up against the blade, but then you see these other white rulers in here, and I've used them for different things, but you can see here I have it set up for router centering, for router measurements, for the table saw, and then when I move it over, I can adjust the whole sled by loosening these, and this whole piece slides down to these stops right here. And when I do that, it repositions the entire fence in alignment for the router table. So then I can put on some of the other Incra accessories for the router table and basically have the same LS positioner set up for my router table, which is a really neat thing. I use it for cutting dovetails sometimes, use it with box joints occasionally. There's just other stuff you can do with it, but this whole system, it's so precise and it's so repeatable. It just makes for awesome cuts. So I built this cabinet when I was teaching myself how to do cabinetry. I kind of modeled it after the cabinets inside our house. We have custom cabinets. There's some other parts and pieces, miter gauges, other fittings and accessories. But I had a really good time. I did some inlay work, did a bunch of different things with it that really, it was fun to build. So further over here, this is my Wahuda 8-inch joiner. It's a segmented head joiner from Wahuda Tools, and being it's a small shop, this is a really nice joiner for me. It looks like it has a fairly small table, but the reality is it's got extensions that come out, and those extensions work really well. They're coplanar to the table. They get done everything that I need to get done, and it stays within a really small footprint. This is a flip top table that I built. Underneath is a DeWalt 735X benchtop style thickness planer. So I built these two tools into this roll top together with the idea that I can roll it out here into the middle of the shop and hook it up to dust collection, and it puts me in a really good position to mill lumber. So I'm able to mill up my rough stock, run it through the joiner, run it across the table saw, and rip it down to size, and then thickness it. And that's worked really well for me for being in a small setting and being a relatively new woodworker. Cutoff bin that I built with a whole bunch of cutoffs like everybody else has, that really I probably should throw away a bunch of, but I haven't. And then some flat stock behind as well. Built overhead rack storage using some of the Rockler clamp holders, and that's worked well for me. Two-sided, as you can see. And this is a Win air filtration system that I use in conjunction with the dust collection. It seems to work real well. I have some more clamps up here, some pipe clamps, and then some panel clamps, cauls that are all kind of built together. So this is the bulk of the wood shop portion of the shop, and it works out well. It's fairly small. This is a 425 square foot garage, and I lost a bunch of it, obviously, to the stuff that sometimes goes in a garage. That's my DeWalt compressor, obviously, with some drainage that I built behind it. Try to keep the air dry, and then run the air up across, and the air actually runs all the way through the shop. So there's air drops pretty much all over the shop. There's one over here on the metal side, and then over there as well, and then there's one here in the middle. But having piped air everywhere is nice. This blue flexible air hose was awesome to install. It's a bunch of pressure fittings. Tends to work really well, at least for me. I did have a sub panel pulled when I started welding. All my woodshop tools are 110, unfortunately, but that'll change at some point. But when I started doing some welding and building up the metal side of the shop, I needed to pull 220, so I pulled a sub panel back here. And so we'll get into the metal side of the shop. This is kind of a welding table. It's actually a pretty neat table. I'll show you how it works. So I built this table as a nesting design, and the idea is that it takes up less room overall, but I can move horizontal bandsaw out of the way, and then if I move the big welder out of the way, if I take a hold of the table and pull the table out, it extends away from the wall and it hits the stops. And so now I have a welding surface that's 2 foot by 4 foot. Obviously I have some stuff on it as well, but it allows me to hang goods over it back and forth so that if I need more room I can do that. And then actually underneath that I built a sacrificial cutting table for the plasma cutter, which is hanging up right now, but so this sacrificial table will actually come out, and then I can take it and hook it onto the welding table and extend the legs up a little bit, and the whole thing becomes flat. And then if I pull the welding table out, this is actually 6 feet of usable space by 4 feet, so I can put a full 4x8 sheet on there and cut it down with my little plasma cutter. But it also makes just for extra room for welding. So while this isn't great for welding on in terms of it being flat and level and being able to clamp stuff to, it acts nicely as a wing to extend off. So that's worked out really well. And the best part is that the whole thing, when nested together, basically it takes up 0 room against the cabinetry here. So this is my MIG welder. It's a cart I built. It's like everybody else who gets into welding, first thing you do is build a welding cart, and so that's what I built. That little MIG welder is just a little Lincoln Electric 140. No big deal, but it works well for me, does what I need it to do. This is my TIG welder. It's an AHP Alpha TIG 200X. I love this welder. I'm not a very good TIG welder at all, but it does a great job. Really happy with it. It's done everything that I've asked it to do, and again, I'm not a good TIG welder, so that's probably not real hard. But I also have a little Lotus LTP 5000 plasma pilot start plasma cutter underneath it. I kind of ran the whole thing together and wired it up so that basically as it comes out the back, I have this one large RV plug, 220 RV plug, and it's broken down for both the TIG welder and the plasma cutter. So everything's kind of in one space. You can kind of see it right there, the pieces where they come together. This is welding rod storage, tungsten storage. Just kind of built it all. Found these neat, well, these are cigar storage tubes that worked out really well. But the whole thing stores together really well. So again, clamps, a bunch of stuff you'd expect to find against a welding table. A cheapy sander that I put some blue paper on to better cut on the metal. This is my Evolution metal cutting saw. I love this saw for what it does. It's really phenomenal. It is a compound miter saw, but it's a slow speed compound miter saw, so it's specifically designed for cutting metal. I do use the Evo blades. I feel like they cut really well. I have a couple of spares back there. They do wear out fairly fast, but I have a guy in town who will actually sharpen carbide saw blades, so that's pretty cool. When they're brand new, all they do is cut. They just cut chips. There's no sparking. There's nothing. It's just cutting chips and throwing chips off the back, and it cuts really fast and really even. Before too long, it starts to throw sparks, and then you throw a lot of sparks, and then all you throw is sparks, and it really doesn't want to cut well. But I got a lot of cutting out of the blade, the first blade I had on it, and enough so that I bought another one, and then I have the other one sharpened as well. So a little airdrop right there just to help clean stuff up. This is my mini mill. This is a little machine shop mini mill. I really like this mill. I have it set up with the DRO. The whole thing is collapsed down, and then obviously this is all cutter and just tooling storage underneath it. But what a great little mill. It's 110. It's super rigid. Cuts the stuff that I want to cut. As long as you don't get anything that's too incredibly silly hard, it does a great job. And I'm not even really using good end cutters for the most part. Fairly generic stuff. but super smooth with aluminum. I did put the auto feed, the auto table feed on this, so it helps when you're doing like fly cutting or something that you're trying to really level stuff out for, and make it clean. But I've been really happy with this tool. You know, it's on the small side, but this is a small shop, so as long as you're not trying to do anything to hogging out too much material at once, this gets the job done really well for me for doing the small projects that I like. Behind that is a little machine shop mini lathe. This is their 5100 high torque lathe. Again, it's small, it doesn't have a whole lot of throw over, but it does everything that I needed to do. And it's taught me how to turn metal on a lathe, and it's given me lots of projects to work on. So I enjoy it. I did put a tachometer on it. Learning speeds and feeds is a really important part in any shop, right? Metal or wood, but especially when you're using lighter weight, smaller tools in a metal shop, it's a big deal to have your speeds and feeds right. You burn up cutter heads, blow up equipment, it can go badly. So that tachometer really helps. I have one on the mini mill as well. And between the two of them, it really does a good job. So I guess the stuff behind here, just regular storage. This is all rattle can stuff. There's some filler waxes, other parts and pieces. Along here, these are all cabinets that came out of a university chemistry lab. So they're super well built, old, from the 50s. And I've got a lot of storage in there that I've labeled nicely because I need to, or else I'll lose stuff. This is my powder coating station. This is one of my more favorite projects. I built this rolling tool stand is basically what it is. And so what's there is there's an Eastwood media blaster on top. And the media blaster, inside I have storage for some dust vac equipment that plays off the back. If you've used a media blaster before, I use aluminum oxide, and it powders really quickly. So it does a great job as a media for media blasting, but it does make it hard to see. So having that remote vacuum setup that lives over here when I'm using it works out really, really well. This was a Craigslist oven. I think it cost like 75 bucks. So I built this rolling chassis around it with the intention of putting the media blaster on top. And then over on this side is an Eastwood dual voltage powder coating system. So this is the little gun for it. I plumbed the whole thing for compressed air, and I plumbed it all for electrical. So the whole system basically runs off of this electrical junction. And so I have both 220 and 110 pulled in separate on separate lines, and those lines plug in over here on some aux plugs that run off. So by plugging the 220 and the 110 into these aux plugs, I can power this entire system, and the whole thing basically is self-contained. So you can see where I ran the air in for both the media blaster right there, and then this is for powering the powder coating gun. So it's all through this manifold back there. That's a grounding cable in the back, so I hang everything off the back. You can't see it because it's underneath the filter, but I actually built a little dump out the back that allows for emptying the media into kind of a trough, and then it slides down, and I can collect it into a bucket. For actually spraying, what I did with this is I built this swing out table, and this arm swings out. These drop down, and they're on little pin lug locks. So this creates a spraying surface, and then underneath here I have a box fan, and I have a little spray tent. And so I pop the spray tent up, put the box fan behind it, and basically draft everything into a filter that's in front of the box fan. So it really keeps this area surprisingly clean. I was impressed with it. I didn't think it would work as well as it did, but the combination of the spray station and then moving immediately into the oven works out really well. So basically in this little block right here, it's collapsed up. It fits underneath TV real easily, but I can media blast my parts, wash them off with some acetone, make sure they're clean, have the spray tent set up, rig them up with some hanging wire, and then I built a sliding rack that lives in here. This will sit within the spray tent, and I can hang small pieces down there and powder coat them up against the, spray them up against the vent, the fan that's running, and then pick the whole thing up and basically move it down here into the oven to cook it off. So, you know, some extra storage and just little parts and pieces, but it's been a really cool addition to the shop. When I started doing metalwork and I started learning more and more about that, one of the things I found out really quickly was that preserving the metal after you make it, can be difficult. And kind of my little running joke with my buddy who does this professionally is that my powder coating station is not powder coated. I had to spray it because obviously it wouldn't fit in my oven. You know, it's a powder coating station that's not powder coated, but it does work out really well for me. And for a hobbyist, it's a pretty great setup. Some other just kind of ancillary stuff that's around. I use these big pink sheets of insulation. I drop them down, and that's what I break down sheet goods with. I use a track saw for that, and it works really, really well. You can see the Makita track saw down there. It's a great tool, pretty phenomenal for what I use it for. But this is my HVLP sprayer. It's a Erlex spray port 6003 with the was it the M8 gun. So this slides in and out. This whole piece slides in and out, and so I can do HVLP spraying, which usually I spray a lot of lacquer, and so I just usually spray it out here in the front. And if you don't know, HVLP sprayed lacquer tends to basically dry before it hits the ground, so it's real easy. A lot of storage built in. You know, being a small shop, you just don't have a lot of room. So everything's on wheels, everything gets pushed around. Someday, when I grow up and I get to build a real shop, maybe when I retire, I won't have to push all this stuff around and it'll be more fixed. But for right now, it actually works out okay. So that's a basic tour of the shop. Video's a little bit longer than I expected it to be, honestly, but that happens. I've learned a ton in the several years that I put this together, doing things and redoing things and trying to make them right. Some of the stuff I inherited. This workbench is my wife's grandfather's. It's not a specifically hand tool workbench, but I kept it and I modified it, put a new top on it, because it was kind of special that way. It's a neat thing to have some history of. I built rolling tables. All these tables around here are modular rolling tables, and I thought that was a great idea. It's worked out, but when I sized them all off of this bench, and it was before I really knew much about hand tool work, so all these benches are too high. Depending on who you talk to, they'll tell you that the top of a hand tool workbench should be somewhere around your wrist or your knuckles when you're standing upright. Maybe. I think it should just be comfortable to work your tools on when you're using your hands on your hand tools. These are too high, but I've built the whole shop around this elevation because that's where I started. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned is that just because you start building a shop, or just because you start doing things, don't be afraid to stop and reset or tear stuff down and rebuild it. I was fortunate to be able to put in piped air throughout the shop. I was fortunate enough to be able to hack together a dust collection system, and I'll put together a better one. But I was recently talking with a friend of mine at work, and he's building a shop in his new house. And the biggest thing that struck me about it was that he didn't have infrastructure laid out. He building a new building, and he had a couple of plugs thrown in there, and that was about it. And so we talked about dust collection, we talked about piped air, and we talked about electrical, different circuits, and 220 and 110, and having multiple circuits so that you don't snap your breakers. But The one thing that I've really learned is to pre-plan. If I had the opportunity to do it again, and someday I will, planning out where you want your tools to sit from a workflow perspective, from breaking down materials to joinery and finish work to all the parts and pieces that you need to make a project work. If you plan those pieces out and where those tools need to sit and give yourself room around them and for in-feed and out-feed, then you basically work backwards from that and decide where you need your electrical and where you need your dust collecting drops. If you put all that stuff in first, it's real easy to build a shop around that. If you don't, and I didn't because I didn't know any better, it makes it hard to fit it in later. So I ended up with a shop with not great dust collection, with mediocre electrical at best until I pulled the sub panel in, and tabletops that are too high. But it's all a learning curve, right? It's all something that we make do with and that we'll move forward with, and it makes me really excited to build another shop someday and take those lessons learned and just be that much more productive. I still really enjoy working out here, and I make some pretty nice stuff for myself. I'm happy with my product and learning the skills necessary to make that work, but the shop layout becomes a big part of it, and I think the more time you spend setting yourself up for success, the more likely you are to find it. So thank you for joining today. I hope you got something out of it, and if you have comments or questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. I'm always learning, and this is all new to me as well, so hopefully you got something out of it. I know I got something out of walking around my shop and just thinking about it. So enjoy your evening and go out and build something.